As an example of what I'm talking about, there's two things that happened last night. I went to a club, as one tends to do after a dance party, after party, and I waited in line for the women's restroom because there is always a line at clubs. And I went into the women's restroom, which is weird because it was a gay club and they were still gender identified, but I went into the women's restroom and there were two stalls. There were three, but one was broken. Ladies, raise your hand if that is fairly frequently we have at least one broken toilet in the women's restroom. Women have needs of toilets to function in ways that men may not necessarily need sometimes, and they tend to get backed up. The plumbing is insufficient. So we have two stalls, and there was no line for the men's restroom per usual. So me being the woman that I am, I walked into the men's restroom to see what it looked like in there. It was fantastic. It was so big. They had 7 urinals and 3 stalls. It was like the mecca of all bathrooms. Now there were, again, this being a gay establishment, maybe they felt like the gay men needed more space in the bathroom to carry on, I don't know. But I know that having access to 9 places to use the bathroom instead of 2 makes a big damn difference. In addition, while I was waiting in the line, at a gay club, not so much the issue, but this happens at straight bars and straight restaurants. I'm standing waiting for the bathroom, and it's usually in a narrow hallway. And my experience is, for some bizarre reason, the men's restroom, the door is first, and the women's restroom is second. I don't know why. I don't know when this became the standard, but it is definitely the most bizarre standard. Go out into the world and start looking. The women's restroom door is usually second. So when we're waiting in line, we're against a wall, standing outside of the man's restroom. When the man exits the door, hallways are not that deep. Now, me as a woman that is 3 inches or more shorter is now face to face with a man who has come directly out of the restroom. That singular experience, even if he is not engaged me at all, that is a physical act of intimidation. My experience is a little nerve-wracking because, as we know, this can go one of 2 ways. He turns and goes down the hallway, or he doesn't. And many times, he doesn't. And maybe it's just a little, hey baby, hey. And it's like, just trying to be here, just trying to wait to go to the bathroom. Maybe the least bad it will be is that he hey babies me. Hey, you looking good? Having a good time? Yeah? And he's standing over me now, remember? And I'm back against a wall. So I've got nowhere, and because my restroom is at the end of the hallway, I've got no out point. I am now totally cornered. Hopefully the only thing he does is verbally assault me. But more times than not, he touches me. This happens a lot, especially if you are in a place where even 1 glass of wine has been consumed. Now the entire power dynamic, and I'm isolated, right? Nowhere to go. So the next time you're designing a building, try and figure out a way. Maybe the women's restroom door is closer to the edge so that she feels that there are more people near her. Maybe design where we don't have lines outside of our bathrooms. Maybe we're on a different hallway, but the plumbing is still back. Because I know that infrastructure of a building dictates a lot of this. But you are creative people. And maybe through knowing that women feel scared to be confronted to a man like this coming out of the restroom, maybe now you know you won't do that anymore. So our first speaker is going to come up. What I would like for you all to do is, again, say your name. And if you want to speak, by the way, not all of our panelists have a presentation. Some of them are just going to speak their truth from the table, and this is a wireless mic, so we'll be able to do that. Say your name, and then just say what, if there's like one comment of like why you're here, what you hope to, like one sentence about what it is, about your lens and your experience that you have to share.
Yeah. Thanks, Laura. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Nidhi Gulati, and as Laura said, I sort of jumped on the opportunity to speak at this panel as she told me. And I'm reusing this slide deck from the previous presentation. So if here and there somewhere it looks like it was not made for CNU, it's because it wasn't. So, and my motivation for being here is I'm a public space planner, and I'm born and raised Indian. So I think some of the most scarring memories that I have are from spending time in public spaces that by no means kept me from doing so, but I'm here. And as a 26-year-old, the first time I really felt free in a public space was I was going to grad school. I started grad school at Texas A&M, and I'm landscape architecture, lots of classes, and one time I'm really tired after studio. I just go outside, and there's a little greenway, and there's a bench, and I take a nap there. And I woke up, and my bag was where I left it. I was untouched, and nothing happened, and I just woke up and was like, I don't know this feeling. So I think it was a totally different sense of independence I felt that day, and that shaped a lot of, why I'm here. I felt a lot more free since then. I've, made many more friends, and I've let my guard down a lot more, as evidenced. Some of you may have evidenced that last night, because I was exhausted on my East Coast time, and there was alcohol involved, and so it was a different kind of experience, and I think I'm having all of those experiences now, and I want to make sure other people have them too. All right, so let's go through the slide deck. This is my version of a checklist of how we think about women and children first as we think about public spaces, especially because we experience them differently. So the reality is that most women, when you talk to them, they will share their feelings that they feel restricted mobility and freedom in public spaces. There are more than what we can imagine types of harassment that they face. It can be physical, it can be verbal, different types of harassment. It's very common. And in most countries, maybe the United States is a little bit better than some countries, but in most countries, a lot of those issues are actually ignored, so we don't even talk about that. And the way we raise children and the way we raise young women, there is always a fear of the other. So stranger danger, those are the kinds of things we teach our children, and there's a way that they're brought up, so those feelings are sort of ingrained in people's minds. And we have somehow, with all of this, with all this data and the statistics, we have sort of engineered safety out of the public spaces. We're not talking as much about the little things that contribute to safety, so that we don't always have to have our guard up, so that we can be more free. We don't keep that as a consideration. So how can public space planners help? There are lots of ways, and I've tried to compile a list. It's by no means exhaustive, but it's a start, and that starts to have that conversation of comfort and safety. So the first thing we need to do is we need to change the lens. We need to stop thinking about things as usable things and usable spaces. We have to start to think about them as spaces we really want to be in, spaces that become places. And we have to think about all the users. How do we make the place attractive for everybody, and especially the children and the women? So that you see that in a picture. It's just like a bus stop can just be a bus stop, which can be very utilitarian, or it can be a place that is happy and joyful and that you want to be in. So the moment we start to change the lens and start to think about safety for women and children, we do a lot of things differently. So let's start with a bigger, broader theory. If we wanted to start with a theory of how we change that lens, let's start thinking about prospect and refuge. So women like to see without being seen. It's a very simple concept, but it can be really complicated. So, we want to be in places where we can see everybody, but we also have a little bit of a nook of our own, so don't feel like we're on a stage. So that theory helps us in a lot of ways. Something as simple as designing a bench with a backrest. It can be something as simple as that. Oops. If you're not counting my 7 minutes, all right, so sometimes it can translate into something as simple as having a bench with a backrest, where you feel like you're suddenly sheltered a little bit, but you can also see out. And that, so the bench being close to the wall. How many of you have tried to go sit in front of the wall? Okay, so it's just like if there's a corner and there's an edge, we try to go sit there so we can actually, see around us. And especially if you're with children and your children are playing in a park, a place where you can actually see the kids play. So it plays out in different ways. If there is a public space where we're making it for women, it has to be, we have to be able to get to that place. So accessibility is a huge issue, and accessibility that is comfortable, accessibility that's right there. So having a crosswalk at the end of a block to get to a public space might actually lose some customers, whereas if the crosswalk was right in your way and you could get to it directly. But what does that mean? As easy it is for us to get to the place, it has to be easy enough to get out. So always having an exit strategy is something that we, and maybe it's just me being from a developing country, I've always, every time I go to a place, a park, a plaza, I want to know how will I get out of there if the situation was not comfortable to me. So I think we do that. All of us do that. Comfort is very important. We get out of an uncomfortable situation, conversation, relationship as easy as we can. So comfort is very, very important. And what gets in the way of getting out of there? Like what gets in the way of exit strategies? Nooks and crannies. We don't like them. And there's a reason that when you go by, you'll often notice it's like a subconscious thing. If you notice a nook or a cranny like that, and you're walking in front of it, you'll just walk a little bit faster. So your pace will get faster. You want to get out of it because you don't want to get pulled into that space. So that's very important. We don't like those, even if it might look pretty in some places. There are systems in most cities, and I know because we are at CNU, we're trying to work on those systems here in the US, but public transportation is something that in most parts of the world is a great system. It's a way that people get around. It almost gets translated, the quality of public transit gets translated into the level of independence that women feel. So one way of making public spaces really attractive and successful is to latch onto that system. So if there is a great bus stop with a market, to have another thing, layer on a plaza, maybe get the park, layer on to the public transit. So access with public transit can contribute a lot to comfort, accessibility, and just usability for public space as well. So it's just like attaching one thing on top of the other. Adequate lighting, very important. I think using public spaces at night, and especially, I'm here from Boston, and in winter, the sunset is at 4 o'clock. My work day doesn't start at 4 o'clock, so at 6 o'clock I'm going back, and if my last quarter-mile walk goes through a public space, it has to be lit. This is the one time you want to feel like you're at a stage, so that if something were to happen to you, you want to know that people can see it. So it's like your lights are your, sort of your eyes on the street. Wayfinding, very, very important. We want to know where we are. Women, often if you're carrying bags, if you're also chauffeuring kids, whatever, we tend to get lost. It's just a simple, at least for me, it's a simple truth. So we want to know at most times where we are and where we're going. So wayfinding comes in really handy in making a public space useful. Places to sit, but places that give you options. So if you were with a group, if you were with kids, you were either family or your mom or your dad or whoever, you have the option to sit in groups, but also the option to sit alone without being in a nook and cranny. So places to sit contribute to a lot of the things that I already talked about. And a lot of other amenities contribute to comfort as well. Especially if you're catering to women and kids and families, you want to make sure that there are other amenities that cater to that. We already heard about the importance of having public restrooms, trash cans, if you're riding your bicycle, a place to put your bike, everything. Like all these amenities get layered on to then create a sense of comfort. And then why would you even go to a place where there's nothing to do? So if there's a particular population that we're trying to attract, if we're trying to attract kids and women and elderly, we have to give them things to do. So it's very important to create activity, permanent or temporary, that is like your thing to do. And then in the broad spectrum of like ages, again, if we were thinking about making it comfortable for everybody, the 880 concept is very powerful. So if a public space is attractive and safe for the 8-year-old and the 80-year-old, we've basically covered everybody in between there. And a place to gather, like public spaces should have some flexible space where we come together as a people, as a city, as a neighborhood. So places to gather are very important, and people gravitate towards those spaces. The little bowl inside of the park is very important. And a lot of times it's not what exactly we put in a public space. It's more important like how we do it. What is the process? Did we talk to women for every planning effort? Did we talk to them? If there were not as many women attending public meetings or charrettes or whatever, did we go and ask why weren't they? Why weren't they in that room? So it's important to just bring kids and women to the table, let them imagine their best public spaces. This is James Rojas' exercise he likes to do. It's play sit, very simple. It's all the toys that nobody will buy or put in their homes. It's like a big basket of toys he takes to every charrette, and he just lets people design their public spaces. So I think it's important to bring all the constituents to the table in order to do justice to the planning effort. So here's all the information. There's some more things to read. That's my email if you want to get in touch. And thank you.
And I've made the cardinal error, which is the worst thing that you can do as a facilitator of a panel. I left off a panelist. So I'm so sorry, Hazel. Hazel Hahn is also one of our panelists, and I'm so sorry that I left you off. I didn't mention you, did I? I don't think that I introduced you. She's a professor of history at Seattle University. She's the author of Scenes of Modernity, Culture and Consumption in the 19th Century Paris. And I wanted a lens of media's. You won't see traditional new urbanists, right? They're not really people that you would be bumping into at this conference, and I wanted that to happen because, we are experiencing space even if we're not one of the professionals designing it, and that I think that we have some really important context information about the history of how we got here, the history of what's going on around the world. So I'm sorry about that, Hazel. The other panelists. Right, so we have a movable mic.
Thank you, Laura. So we're being asked to relay a personal experience first. I've been very interested in issues to do with anti-violence against women for many years. I'm a professor, and it's not so much an experience I want to share of my own. I've been teaching material about space and safety for many, many years, and actually I'm really depressed that I'm still teaching it at the same level as I was 25 to 30 years ago, and that my students are actually relaying to me the same sorts of experiences that I experienced when I was their age. That's a bit of a downer. And really what I want to argue, and I'm with you, is that cities that are designed to be safer for women and girls are safer for everyone. So there's a nice kind of, going to be some nice sort of crosstalk between what we're going to be talking about and what Mita talked about too. So the point really that I want to sort of raise here is that there's also growing, for many years there's been growing evidence that gender-based violence is something that also impacts people differently according to their identities and their experiences. So given the theme of the session, in a sense what we're doing is to, by fully addressing personal safety, it's also a way of thinking through intersectionality and feminism in practice. And the argument really that we're going to be making is that developing a safely built environment can lead to a more inclusive city. So I'm just going to go off my text here a little bit. One of the things that is fascinating is that these ideas are being engaged with in a whole variety of places in the world. So one of the things that I think is interesting, hearing where you're from, is that there is a group of people in India that are working on a project called Dying for a Pee. And this is about finding safe places for women to go to the bathroom, right? And it's a former colony of my country of origin, so they're using kind of English language things. And some of the ideas that I'm going to be talking about with safety audit are also being taken up in a whole variety of places in the world too, even in Russia. So I'm going to be talking about a group that is based in Toronto called METRAC. And they're actually called METRAC Action on Violence now, but their former name and where they get METRAC from is the Metropolitan Action Committee on Violence Against Women and Children organization. Their website is www.metrac.org. And for them, they define safety as freedom from the threat, fear, and experience of all sorts of violence, oppression, and discrimination. So a pretty broad definition, but also one that very much sort of picks up the ideas that we've been looking at so far. So not so much about safety of your car, right? It's a different sort of way of thinking about safety than perhaps cities, governments primarily view them. they're very interested in thinking, Met practices are very interested in working with individuals, communities and institutions to change our ideas and policies with the goal of ending violence against women and youth and others that might be at high risk of violence and harassment. One of the tools that they use to do this, and you can go and take a look at this and find stuff online, is a very innovative and wonderful in its simplicity, the Women's Safety Audit. And this is based on two principles. The first one is that all users of a space are the safety experts of that space. Thus, users should be involved when evaluating the space. So, here's some crosstalk. When a space is made, and the second one is when a space is made safe for the most vulnerable of users, it in turn becomes safe for everyone. So let me tell you about what the safety audit does, because it's, in a sense, a very, as I said, it's sort of marvelous in its simplicity and also the complexity in which it works into. Now, I do want to say straight away that it's primarily dealing with public spaces, and I acknowledge, as do they, that most violence against women occurs in their homes. Right? So what it does is it asks people to think about places that they feel unsafe in, and they can get together and then they audit the place that they think that they're fearful of. Or you can do it in places you feel safe, like what is working. And you can grade places. A is good, C is okay, F is needs more effort, kind of thing. So you go to the area and you have a checklist, and it's sort of 4 general areas. The first one is, what are your general impressions? Are the places that, does it feel safe there? Does it feel good? Do you feel comfortable? Have you had issues there before? And then the second area is really around physical characteristics, sort of built environment type of characteristics. And these are things like lighting. Is there any? Is it broken? Sight lines. This includes things like overgrown bushes, so that you're literally asked all these questions and to go through them. And isolation, can you be seen? Right? Can you be seen? And also, can you be heard? Are there movement predictors? Like, are there places that people can see that you can get out? Are there hiding places? Right? And then the maintenance of it. Is there negative graffiti? Is there trash? Are there places that make the place seem unwelcoming? And then also accessibility. This could be for people with disabilities, or it could be in terms of thinking about public transit. And then security. And this can mean things like, who would you call? Would you call a city councillor? Would you call the police? Would you call utilities to fix this problem? And then one of the aspects of it that I think is really fantastic is that the groups are asked to make recommendations. What could be improved? And that these then become a way in which groups of denizens, I'm using the word broadly because I have problems with the term citizen, because I want to be in a sanctuary city, can have a relationship with their city government about how to move forward to make cities safer and more inclusive for all. And then Amy, with the rest of our 7 minutes that we don't seem to have, is going to talk about how that works in the city of Seattle.
And I was under the impression that we were doing the same 7 minutes, so I'm not going to stretch out for 7 minutes. Oh, okay. Can I do 1 minute?
You can do it. I'll even give you 2 minutes.
Okay, great. I'll just shorten this. Kim asked me to talk a little bit about how this might be operationalized in an environment. As she mentioned, that this is used a lot in the developing countries, and wanted me to talk a little bit about how this could be operationalized in Seattle. I was just going to say very quickly that Seattle is trying to come up with better ways of doing community engagement, like most places. We had a system in place, and we did an audit of that system and found that overwhelmingly people that were participating in that system were not representative of their communities in terms of race, age, and particularly homeownership versus renter, things like that. And so we're trying a lot of new tools, and so I think this kind of targeted outreach is really important and a tool that we should be using more often. We have many, I think, plans and engagement processes that could be informed by a tool like this, including the park system plan. And I want to also just highlight that I think it's really important to think of safety not just in capital improvements, but in operationalizing things. We have some projects where we're doing park activation, and gender balance is one of the things that we look at to see if that is actually being successful or not. If are women there, does that mean that we've created a safer space? So I think in terms of parks, in terms of transportation planning, again, not just the capital improvements, but also operational decisions. I was doing some outreach with the immigrant community one time, and they were talking a lot about that when they have strollers with them, that they don't feel like the buses stop for them because it's too much trouble to let down the ramp, all of those kinds of things, so they end up waiting at the bus stop longer. And so it's that kind of thing that's really hard to encapsulate in data, that I think that these types of tools really elevate experience, and practitioners, planners, elected officials need to know that type of experiential information so that they can do a better job. I had a couple of specific examples, but I'll just present them. Okay, so for example, one of the things that I'm hoping that we can use this tool, we are working on in the University District, right next to the University of Washington. We've got a new light rail station going in. We're working on the streetscape design for how people will connect from that new light rail station to the campus. And I think that this would be a perfect tool, particularly as we know about violence against women on campuses, to really focus on making sure that that linkage there is very safe for the walkers, bikers, whomever. So,
thank you so much. I want to make one comment as we transition into the second half of our panelists. My very first CNU, the very, very first one that I ever came to, if any of you met me at that time, I had a brace on my leg and I was in a wheelchair. Steve Mouzon remembers. I had fallen down a flight of stairs, which you should not do in order to experience what it's like to be a person that is not healthy and fit and has to navigate the world in a much different place, right? I don't necessarily recommend falling headfirst down a flight of stairs. But if you do it, I assure you that the world looks like a very different place when you're in a wheelchair. Now, I already knew this because my dad's in a wheelchair. And so, have any of you gone from being very physically capable to having that taken away from you for some amount of time? I'm not even talking crutches, I'm talking fully like demobilized. It is a miserable, miserable world, and brand new buildings that make ADA compliance. Do you know where the damn ramp is? It is like at the end of the block. The handicap parking is here, and the ramp is at the end of the block. And you know where the stairs are? Front and center, baby. Those healthy people are just running in and out of that building. Think about these things. It is really hard to get all the way down the ramp. So as it works for safety for women, my aunt volunteers in a shelter for women that have been the victims of violence. If you want to know if a place feels safe, coordinate with one of the advocacy groups, and there will be women that work in advocacy that have lived through the experience of assault and violence and are very happy to tell you if you are doing a good job or not in helping them feel safe, because they are hyper attuned to whether or not they feel safe in place. So find you an expert that can tell you what feels safe or dangerous. Rolling into that, our next two panelists are going to speak about their experience of young women. Yes, ma'am.
I also want to say it's not only don't have a handicap, it's also elderly. Because now that my mother is so old, my daddy, when he was got real old before he died. Well, got old before he died. Anyway, it's eye-opening.
Sure.
You have to look. I mean, some of the entries for him to get in were like around back of a restaurant. We had to go to the kitchen at one place. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Get you somebody who knows about the thing you want to know about, and when we're talking about women's safety, connect with organizations that advocate for women that have lived through unsafe experiences, and they are the best experts that can give you quick feedback. Like, I feel really threatened with your design. Ladies?
Hi, I'm Claire White, and this is my friend Emma Connell, and we are two teenagers. We're juniors in high school, both 16 years old, from St. Louis, Missouri. And we are the youngest CNU panelists of all time, so congrats to us. And yeah, we are here to talk about feminism in New City planning.
Kind of to give a different perspective of like what it means to be a teenage girl and live in the city and have to navigate certain things like public transit or how we feel like walking down the street. And like, I've lived in the city in my entire life. I've lived in the same house. A lot of the things that I do are in walking distance or just a bus ride away or a bike ride away. And neither of us drive, so those are the things that we utilize. And I don't think that a lot of people understand that violence against women is such a problem that, like, we ride the bus together home from school, and on the daily we have men talking to us. I've had a drunk man touch my 13-year-old sister's hair on the bus, people that just have like no respect for your space, no respect for even just understanding you don't want to talk to them, even though you're giving all the right body language, you're not giving them the time of day, and they still don't leave you alone. And
Yeah, so we, like she said, we frequent public transit. We also ride our bikes a lot, especially when it's nicer outside. And sexual harassment and feeling eyes on you is constant. And that has been that way for me, especially I'm a taller girl, so that's been like since I was 11 years old. You know, it starts very young, and it's conditioned into girls. You know, you gotta be aware, it's stranger danger, watch out for men, they're out to get you, and it shouldn't be like that. You know, girls should be able to feel safe in the places that they live, and always having that little voice in the back of your head for watch out, you know, you gotta make sure that you're not attracting too much attention, you gotta make sure that you're not being loud or, you know, excitable, because that will draw eyes to you. I don't want that anymore, and I don't want that for the kids that come after me, or if I ever have children and daughters, I don't want them to have to experience that, because it's tiring. You know, women are the longest marginalized group in the history of human civilization, and it's time to get rid of that.
You mentioned something about that. We were talking about protected bike lanes. Can you mention what the comment was about the protected bike lanes?
yeah, so this morning we went out to breakfast and we were talking about that, and this is our first time in Seattle, so Laura was just kind of telling us about a lot of stuff that was happening, and we were talking about how we rode our bikes a lot, and she told me about the dedicated bike lanes. Is that what you said? Yeah. And that was a really exciting concept to me, because I can't like count the amount of times that I've been in a bike lane where there's no barrier between me and the car, and I stop at a stop sign and I have a man roll down his window and he's like, hey baby, like what's going on? I've had a man say, hey Angel, you need a ride? And I was like, no, I'm fine. And he literally pulls over his car and tries to cut me off, so I can't leave and I have to talk to him. And stuff like that, I think people need to understand, like having a protective barrier between myself, just as a bicyclist in general, just from a car, but so I don't get unwarranted attention, that if I need a safer place to be, that I can get that easily. And I think, kind of a segue into our next topic, something that's really important to us is, like, I think people would have better understanding of this if a lot of people practiced, or at least learned more in depth about intersectional feminism, which is something that's like pretty new to me, because I think I probably started delving into feminism in my freshman year of high school, and I was in US history at the time, so we were learning about like the suffragette movement, and I was also really into like punk rock at the time, so I was learning about the right girl movement. And one of the problems for me is that the narrative of feminism is so whitewashed, and I wasn't seeing girls that like looked like me. I wasn't seeing girls with afros. I wasn't seeing other black girls. I wasn't seeing girls that looked like the girls around me in my city. And a lot of people, like, their hearts are in the right place, but having such a whitewashed version of feminism is very damaging, because it doesn't cover every type of person and every type of girl, and that takes away from the liberation of everybody.
And something that we both feel very strongly about is that white feminism isn't really feminism, because if you exclude certain groups like queer women, women of color, trans women especially, like, people don't get the concept a lot of the times that feminism should be for all women, you know, not just a certain group. And as girls who fit, you know, many different forms of marginalized groups, you know, we're both identify as bi, and we both are girls, and Emma's a girl of color. It's important for us to feel that all groups of who we are safe, you know, because you have certain things that are safe for me because I'm a white girl that aren't safe for Emma, and yeah.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. By the way, there will be a lot of opportunity to ask our panelists questions and for us to have a facilitated dialogue on that case. Sure. Thank you.
So I have a really different perspective because I'm a historian. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 19th century Paris. So here's my opportunity to try to correct a misconception that is very widespread about 19th century Paris that is taught, I think, in just about every architecture school, which is that in the Second Empire, Paris underwent massive transformation. Now that, of course, is partially true. The incorrect part is the notion that Paris was actually rebuilt. So that is far from true. So throughout the 19th century, including the remainder, until the mid-20th century, really, there was really one central urban space in the 19th century, and it had nothing to do with Second Empire haussmannization. So this is the Grand Boulevard from Madeleine Church on the west to Bastille, where the Bastille prison used to be, on the east. So this street, continuous series of streets, which is in a form of a semicircle, was created when a wall that used to be there was demolished under Louis XIV. So by the early 19th century, it was this very, very prominent and very popular promenade. And you can see a lot of women. And in this particular stretch of the Grand Boulevard, the most famous Boulevard d'Italia, it was really kind of a well-to-do women who spent time there. So this was a very, very safe space for women as well as for men, and it was a space of leisure and recreation, but also sociability. So already by the 1830s and 1840s, there were lots of new urban spaces in which women could really safely go to, especially well-to-do women and middle-class women. You also see girls, so women and girls going to these kinds of recreational places, and these were really publicized as modern and the kinds of things that made Paris a really desirable city to visit as well as live in. Arcades, a lot of the arcades were built in the 1820s and 1830s. So you see here that, again, this is another really safe space. It's of course a space for consumption. So if you look on the right side, there's a woman over here, right, who is admiring hats. Here's another woman who is looking at the woman who is admiring hats. So there is a lot of connotations about how inviting and safe and desirable it is to walk through these areas, but also to consume. So this is Grand Boulevard again that I mentioned, from Madeleine to Bastille. So for the 19th century, for Parisians, the Grand Boulevard meant this one thing, this series of streets that were curved. So the mistake that I very frequently see is the whole notion that Grand Boulevard was new boulevards created under Haussmann. So this set of boulevards, again, were very old, and they became more luxurious during the Second Empire, but the sidewalks had already been built by this time, and again, you can see lots of people, women and men, children, just kind of hanging out there. It was very common for women to walk from one end of the boulevard to the other end. Here is a kind of a slice of around 1850 Parisian apartment building, and different classes lived on different floors. So this is to illustrate just how many all different classes kind of coexisted in the same building. Here is misspelling, Mary Cassandra May, in the Lodge 1878. So here is a woman who is using, this binocular or monocular to look at someone, presumably, or something, and then while she's doing that, she's being looked at by a man in a different part of the theater, right? So this is partly what, earlier there was an idea about, women like to be kind of a more private than men. Now, in one of the places in which this was perhaps a little bit different, I was in Paris, where, for better or worse, women were quite used to being looked at, and it continues to be like that today. So, so there's a question of whether women could be flaneurs, but I'd like to argue that a lot of women were flaneurs, and that continues very much today as well. So here's a typical famous cafe with chairs and tables, and you see that at a lot of Parisian cafes, the chairs are located so that people who are sitting at these cafes, they are not looking at each other. They're actually looking at the people who are passing by. So both men and women are really used to doing people watching and being looked at as well. So this is now the late 19th century. There were just like a huge number of these colorful posters that were created. And these posters illustrate women who feel safe going to places and being quite independent. The one on the left shows a well-to-do woman with children. The message is, you can take a train. You don't have to go with your husband. While your husband might be busy, you can go with your children. Go to Normandy, go to a beach, and it is perfectly safe to talk to a local man in this quaint Normandy costume, right? And that, so that's the kind of message of using, of course, public transportation, the efficient new railroad system. In the second picture, there is a woman who's bicycling, like a sporty bicycle costume. In the third one, it is about women bathing, and again, feeling very confident, having a sense of agency, having this kind of a private, psychic kind of a space, carving out your own space kind of thing. There are a couple of men who are admiring her, and again, this is not meant to be in this kind of a scary way, but that women are enjoying this. Of course, the vast majority of people who created these posters were men, so that is something to consider. Is my time up?
Yeah.
Okay, then I will just add one more. I will just add a couple of sentences more. Now I'd like to move to Seoul. This is Hanoi, where today this is the old quarter of Hanoi, and this is how it looks like very often, which is it looks completely chaotic. And the traffic can be completely chaotic, but there is just something about Hanoi's old quarter that works really well. It works really well because the spaces are used very, very frugally. Everyone is there, and this is not a space that is dedicated to tourists at all. This is a space that the regular people of Hanoi use, and it is for themselves. And for that reason, it really works. Now, just the last thing that I would mention is I was born in Korea. I left when I was 1979, and this is the Cheonggyecheon stream that was covered up, and then there was eventually a elevated highway. Now, in 2005, this was uncovered, and now this is an extremely beautiful and pleasant walkway. There's the water element, and it just works really, really well. And it's a safe space for everybody. Thank you.
And I want to jump straight into questions from the audience, and I would like to give, rather than necessarily directing, obviously if you have a question for a specific panelist, but I also want our panelists to feel comfortable sort of cross-pollinating, right? Because you're all women, so you've experienced life and these things. So who has a question? Yes, ma'am.
I would thank you very much for all your work. I am an urban designer in the city of Sarasota. I'm also a survivor of violence and abuse, and so I've always incorporated those aspects into my work. And I was really lucky when I was young in my career to work with Sherry Carter and her husband. Sherry's a good friend. And that when they were initially doing their SEPTED work and their subsequent books and things. And the two things I would suggest as a takeaway, I've worked both public and private side. What I've done, I'm doing a stint at the city right now, and so I led the development review committee, because when we're talking about these spaces, both public and private, one of the things that we did is to reach out to our female officers and to make them part of the development review committee. We've always done the audits, but what we were finding is that we thought we had done these things, and then they would get in the site plan element, and suddenly, things would disappear on us. So having that person that really had that perspective, to review those plans and to fight for those elements to make sure they're not lost, it delves in the details. But also in the flip side of that equation, when we do charrettes and other things, we tend to bring the firemen, fire people and or the engineers or other people. But I think when we go into other cities, it's especially important to reach out to the female officers, not automatically go to sometimes the captains, as all things, the social equity isn't always there. But to make those relationships and include them in the charrette, because they will see all of the crime elements, but also to bring that perspective to it.
Fantastic. That's a fantastic point. Who else in the audience? I'm happy to facilitate the conversation amongst the panelists as well. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. You were all terrific. It was exciting to hear all the different perspectives, and I'm wondering if anybody's done a crosswalk between some of the philosophies that you're practicing, whether it's on the public sector side or on the design side, with what, with like universal design principles, because it seems like there might be some low-hanging fruit where we could improve on existing principles.
Does anybody want to jump on that?
What do you mean by principles?
Yeah, so make sure that we're using a language that everybody has access to. Go ahead.
So universal design was primarily developed by people with disabilities, and it takes what's the American Disabilities Act quite a bit further. It's much more thoughtful about accessibility, not just in the public realm, but how you would design homes, like gets into residential design, and to be more inclusive.
So it's like taking ADA and creating a parallel track that looks at the safety of women and girls in space. And I think that that's a fantastic idea to think about this sort of thing. It's like, how do we require that you look at these, that you're mandated to make sure that you include it in your design when a building's built.
So I'm not a planner, but I will say that the group that I used to teach at the University of Toronto, which is why I know the METRAC group, and when they were starting their work in the 1980s, one of the groups they worked with was an advocacy group around women with disabilities. So that was something that they brought very much into the beginning of their ideas around trying to come up with, in a sense, sort of plain spoken English, although it can be translated into other languages as well, is something that would get everybody, whether they had a disability or not, to rethink how space worked. So it's not necessarily that they were bringing together some sort of philosophical thoughts with universal design and planning, but it was just from the experience of knowing that this was a set of voices and experiences that needed to be in there at the beginning. And in fact, they worked with that group first before they were working with immigrant groups, for instance, with some New Canadians, as they're called.
So I want to ask the panelists a couple of questions. So you started your conversation off about talking about how in your early life you did not feel safe. like they were actively, and that you were a young adult before you had your first sigh of relief. When we are looking at like parks, the public realm, right, either on a sidewalk or in an area like that are around buildings that are intended for people to sit and enjoy, what would you say was one or two identifiable elements that made the difference for you to feel safe versus not safe?
So one thing I hate, I was trying to find a softer word for it. Yeah, so, but it is stronger. So one thing I hate I don't drive, I walk everywhere, I take public transit. And I did a lot of walking in Texas and in Arizona. So the one thing I really hate that gets in the way of me feeling safe is blank walls. Nobody looking at you, and just the feeling that you are not welcome here. You know, there's something inside that we're trying to hide from you, and you just being a pedestrian or a woman or whatever, you're not supposed to see what's inside those walls. So that is one thing that it conveys. The other thing it conveys is that nobody can locate you. So that, the age-old concept of eyes on the street, I think is very, very important. So having, facades that are more open, having windows, having just punctures in walls makes a huge, huge difference. So that's definitely one of the things. The other thing I think that makes a huge difference for other people is the places to sit. Like, even though, just knowing that there's a bench, like just knowing that if you got tired or whatever, or I'm also clumsy, I can fall a lot and trip a lot everywhere. So it's just like a place that you can actually rest. So in the absence of that, you don't really feel like there's a reason there isn't a bench here. You question yourself, and maybe that means it's not safe. Maybe it means you're not supposed to linger here. So those little things do add, really deep dimensions. And the third thing I want to say is just making places that are not inviting to children, I think just makes it feel unsafe as well. It's just like, why does one design or one place or whatever look more as if it is for adults? There's got to be something in places where there's nothing for a kid to do. Like if I did bring my 4-year-old niece with me and she won't be able to do anything, I think there's a problem. So yeah, if I were to pick my top 3, I'd probably say that's.
That's great, and I'd like to go down here and ask you guys the same question. Are there like the dedicated bike lanes? Like, is there a place that you, like on one block where you're like, I avoid that block at all costs because this thing exists that increases the unwelcome, like somebody being able to pull their car in front of you and stop your bike is a big deal? Are there any other elements that you're like, I really like this block because it prevents that from happening?
Yeah, well, whenever we bike together, we usually try and do like back roads almost, and you're more like.
To use bike lanes, we like to use alleys because it doesn't put us on.
Hand over the microphones. What I was saying is whenever we bike, we usually don't go down main roads and we don't use bike lanes because it puts us on display and kind of puts us out there for like other people's consumption. So we try to stay out of people's ways just to be safe and also so that we're not harassed.
And alleys, you can find some cool stuff back there. That's another great thing about them. Dumpster diving is a great activity. But I do think that I don't like to ride my bike in like a public space really. Like I like to use like kind of like the housing areas of our city, because the way that St. Louis is set up, I live like in the south of St. Louis, and a lot of like where I live around it, there's like the main road, Kings Highway, and then like behind that is like houses, and I live in one of them, obviously. And I like to ride around there, like the alleys back there, because I don't like riding down the main road at all, because it's like there are cars everywhere, and when the stop signs are on and you're waiting to cross, it's just, you feel like every person and every car is looking at you, and especially if it's like a hot day and you're wearing like a tank top and shorts, it can be embarrassing.
Fantastic. So one of the, I saw Mark Nikita And I've been to Birmingham, and they did a great activation of alleyways, like really focusing in Birmingham, Michigan on making alleys like really pleasant, and so allowing those secondary arterials for people that don't want to be in the main thoroughfares. I think it's great to hear. Yes.
In the long term, the primary benefit of LEAD will likely be that it introduced the general public to the reality and the measure of climate change and what we can do about it. In other words, it made the problem visible. Do you have thoughts on a sort of LEAD initiative for intersectional equity?
So, panelists, so LEAD would be the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. So I want to make sure that I understand your question. So as it relates to constructed buildings, or are you just talking about the structure of creating a system that you can apply to and have like a checklist of like, considering these things for evaluation of like your building rated a 10 on the woman's safety scale?
Oh, I'm not, what I'm saying is you've identified a really significant issue that we have to, if we give people the benefit of the doubt, we have to assume that a lot of people in the society are not thinking about very much. Or they, presumably, if they thought they were nice people, they wouldn't be doing it. I mean, again, let's give people the benefit of the doubt, but, this is a really ubiquitous, pervasive issue. LEAD was very effective doing what it did in its area, and I'm just curious if panelists or anybody else has ideas about how you could sort of make this more visible.
So have environmental designers ever thought about designing, like creating design criteria that would intersect with LEAD and make it safe for women and children to get around?
Yeah, I think it's a design issue. I think it's also a greater societal issue, and I think, both of those, so I'm asking a question about both of those areas.
Okay, so I think I want to give our panelists an opportunity, and then I know that there are a couple of audience members that have some thoughts, so I want to do that. I want you to have an opportunity to say and then pass it over, and I want you to mention how the safety audits factor into this, and then we'll go down here to this.
I think one thing with initiatives and checklists like we have with LEAD is that it is a process that's voluntary. You can opt in or opt out. So it doesn't make the level of change that we want. It will not be sweeping, that's one. And it adds an extra layer of work that you have to do, an extra layer of planning, an extra checklist. So for most people, it translates into more dollars, more time spent and needing more capacity and whatnot. And I do know that designers don't like to have all those checklists a lot of times because we like to critique those checklists. Nothing is ever complete enough. But developers like to have checklists. They want to know that check, 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 done. So the rest of the world likes to have checklists. So I think there's value to it, but there's something that, in my opinion, will be even more effective, but that we need to look at policies. We need to look at design qualities. We need to work with more and more city departments and make sure that it's not something you can opt in or out. It's not something that's optional. It's something that you have to think about. So just working with women who are survivors, and working with kids and schools that work a lot with kids after school and stuff like that. So I think we need to work with them to really make policy changes. And it's amazing to me that we already are not doing it, because we're talking about 75% of the world here. Combining kids and women, we're probably talking about even more and more. So it's just,
Laura, it actually should be in every RFP and RFQ that governments put out.
Yeah. We're talking about, you got fire codes, right? Why do we not have a don't attack women codes, right? Like buildings that are designed so that we're less likely to get attacked. This is a safety code, right? This is basic code 101.
We're writing it in our code. So I'm writing the form-based code right now. So So it's second nature to me. So the things as designers do is when we put in, what are you allowed to do for a wall? You're not allowed to do an opaque, dangerous wall, period. So when we're looking at landscaping, we're not allowed to have that landscaping that makes you feel unsafe. So if you can code that and you can keep those features in every time, the hardest part is keeping typically the government following it. Once you get the designers and developers used to it, they just know that these features have to be.
It's a layer of code.
It's just plain and simple. Same thing with the universal design. You know, we look at those things, and that's on sea level rise. What's causing problems is because we're doing raised bases, you know, we're getting buildings up and we're creating a lot of inaccessible buildings. We want good frontages. But if you are already programming, putting your options in there so they can look at what you want, you're most likely to actually replicate it.
Certainly when Kim and I, again, were talking about the safety audit as a tool, and I was identifying those things that we already do that could use this as an input, one of the things that I had identified was, again, in the university district, we're currently working on the design guidelines. And I think that the type of information, the problems and solutions identified in a safety audit would be perfect for putting into design guidelines. I think we also have we have design review boards that work with private sector development. We have a design commission that works with public sector development. And I think that we've done a good job in Seattle of at least teaching people that they need to think about race and social justice in our built environment. And I think that doing an additional layer of education about how women experience the city and what that could mean. You know, for example, the design commission is almost all men. So how do we both use our public engagement processes to inform that, but also make sure that they understand the issue and the solutions as well. And there's certainly a lot we can do better.
Just back to what that man said back there about like climate change, I just wanted to clarify like what kind of question you were asking about it, or if you were just trying to facilitate a discussion. I don't think I really understood your question.
What?
I think that he's trying to talk about, like, basically how to ensure, like, we've raised an issue here that it's like, aha, we weren't aware of that. Nobody was, when I say nobody was paying attention to it, as a profession, it was not being mandated that we have a focus on this thing. And so I feel excited to be like, we've tripped across this thing. The disturbing part is that I believe that we as women have been complicit in not saying, I feel scared standing outside a bathroom, please stop designing hallways like this, right? You've never heard that. That's on me. By the way, women architects, I bet you stand outside of bathrooms too. And you're designing bathroom hallways that do the same thing. So like, I think that he's trying to figure out like how do they as professionals figure out like what the standard looks like to correct this.
Yeah, and I think that an important kind of like parallel between the two is denial and people not accepting that it's like a real solid issue within not only city planning but like all surrounding communities, that like with climate change, like some people are like, oh, it's just not real, like that's not a real thing that's happening, and that's how I feel a lot of people react the same way to like women being endangered, like just out and about.
Yeah, and it's not that they are denying it, it's that it's not in their interests to accept it.
It's not true. They deny it. And
they do deny it, but okay,
within the last week.
Yeah.
So this is part of the thing, right? This is our truth. Yeah. Within the last week, I've had a man tell me, here, a CNUer that is a city planner, tell me that he does not believe that my experience of public realm is different than his in a city. He said the words. He is a great guy. He's a good friend. So it is, first we have to acknowledge that we are being told this is not a real problem. It is, and all women are experiencing it. Let's just accept it's true and then move to solution. Prisca, you wanted to say something that I wanted to get to? Okay. Did anyone else have a comment about this specific topic before we go to the next one? Okay, let me get to her. And then the next question is going to go to the woman in the back.
I think this kind of issue is ubiquitous with women. I think we are trained not to speak up for ourselves or for our best interests. And in the workplace, then it becomes more difficult to bring these kinds of things up and to be taken seriously. And I see that as a great wall of obstruction.
Thank you.
Laura, before we leave LEAD and CNU's relationship to the USGBC, I just want to challenge everybody in here to write to the US Green Building Council and tell them that social equity credits are not innovation credits, that they should become requirements in LEAD, because that is part of the institutional problem using that grading system. It's like a bike rack gets as many credits as a social equity innovation credit. So, and I think it's also a good opportunity for CNU how we influence LEAD for neighborhood developments to say to the USGBC, it's time for you to step up because we're moving on.
Okay, another comment on this topic, and then as soon as we finish with this topic, let me get
It's just a quickie. Sure. I don't know about you, but I never gave LEAD the time of day, and I never will. It is manufacturers came up with a little grading system so people would buy their products. If you use the original green, you know that term, if you build traditional buildings, you don't need these products. I'm just saying, yes, you're trying to clean up a thing that we're using now, and the best part of LEAD is the neighborhood grading system, which the CNU helped develop.
Yeah.
But this LEAD is a bunch of baloney, and I hope it goes bye-bye.
I think it can always be a yes and. There are people that care about LEAD, and it's great. If that's your thing, then walk down on LEAD and get in front of the USGBC and say, where are your safety credits? Where is your women can be safe in this building credits, right?
And shout out to Steve Muzan for originally being a great record. So thank you for writing that
for my comment isn't so much about LEAD and how we integrate these good practices into our designs, but more to the commendation of the young ladies who are here, because I do think that they are growing up in a generation that most of us did not grow up in, and the stranger danger pressure that they feel and that they hear about every day is not what we heard as children. And so I think that the increased pressure that they feel, that I can sense in their words, is a difference today that not many of us really truly understand. So it's bigger than it was.
Yeah, thank you so much. Something that Emma and I were talking about before we got here, we were like, we're not millennials, we're younger than millennials. We were born in the 21st century, and so that's something that I think that a lot of like pop culture and like the media will focus on, you know, like what the people who are like 20s now are feeling like, oh, like those are the young people, but like we're younger than 20 and it still affects us, so thank you.